A huge storm is bearing down from the west, and it could shut them down.
This does not get any more intense.
The Deadliest Catch crew was no stranger to danger, but this time their journey took a terrifying turn. As they sailed the unforgiving Bering Sea, their radar detected something unexplainable, something enormous lurking beneath. It wasn't just another rough day at sea, this was the beginning of an unspeakable mystery. Let us uncover the truth behind this haunting discovery, one that could rewrite everything we know about the ocean. Secrets of the Bering Sea. These tough-as-nails fishermen are used to hauling in crabs under brutal conditions, freezing waters, howling winds, and unpredictable storms. But this time, the ocean threw them a curveball they never saw coming. What started as just another day on the job quickly spiraled into an adventure filled with strange sights, creepy vibes, and more questions than answers. But as the sun set over the restless sea, they hauled up a pot, not of crabs, but of something that would haunt them forever. It all began with some weird blips on the radar. At first, they shrugged it off. Out here, technology hiccups all the time. Maybe the equipment was acting up because of the rough conditions, or so they thought. But then the sonar started spitting out these blurry, unrecognizable images of things moving under the boat. Big things. Things that didn't match any sea creature they'd ever seen. What was supposed to be another day pulling up crab pots turned into a head-scratching puzzle. Then one night, something happened that sent chills down their spines. While they worked under a pitch-black sky, a strange glow started coming from the water. It wasn't like the usual faint sparkle of bioluminescence. This light was brighter, pulsing like it had a heartbeat, and it looked like it was moving with purpose. The crew leaned over the side to get a better look, but just like that, the light vanished. The silence on the deck was heavy, and even the most fearless among them couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As if that wasn't enough, their trusty equipment started acting up. Crab pots came back up bent out of shape, almost as if some powerful force had crushed them while they were underwater. Tools that had been checked and double-checked refused to work. The failures were random and made no sense. For a crew whose lives depend on everything running smoothly, this wasn't just frustrating, it was dangerous. The weirdness didn't stop there. One of the guys swore he saw a massive shadow gliding under the boat while they were diving. The water was murky, sure, but whatever it was moved fast and was bigger than anything he'd seen before. Some of the crew brushed it off as a trick of the light or tired eyes playing games, but others couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Speculation ran wild. Maybe it was some kind of underwater volcano or an earthquake messing with the sea floor. Others whispered about undiscovered sea creatures, the kind that only show up in wild legends. A few even joked, half seriously, about ghosts or curses. The laughs were uneasy, though. No one really wanted to say out loud what they were thinking. The ocean was hiding something, and it wasn't friendly. The captain decided it was time to dig deeper. If something strange was lurking down there, they were going to find it. They dropped underwater cameras and high-tech gear, battling the rough seas to get everything in place. What they pulled up was nothing short of mind-boggling. The footage showed deep trenches crisscrossing the ocean floor, littered with shipwreck debris. Among the wreckage were huge, unidentifiable objects that didn't belong. And then there were the markings, weird geometric patterns carved into the seabed, almost like they'd been drawn by some unseen hand. The discovery only raised more questions. Were those shapes the work of ancient humans, or was something else responsible? Could those unidentifiable objects be remnants of lost civilizations or even something extraterrestrial? No one had answers, and the mystery only deepened. As the days dragged on, the crew started to feel the strain. Sleep became a luxury as their dreams were filled with glowing lights and shadowy figures. Tensions rose, and the usual banter gave way to snapping and arguments. The open sea, which usually felt like a second home, now seemed more like a trap. It was as if the ocean itself didn't want them there. Eventually, the captain called it. They'd gathered all they could, and it was time to head back. The mood on board was grim. Their haul was small, their spirits were low, and the mystery they'd stumbled upon still hung over them like a dark cloud. When they finally reached port, they shared their story. Scientists pored over the data and the footage, intrigued but cautious. Theories popped up, but no one could say for sure what they'd encountered. For the crew, it was a humbling experience. The ocean had always been their workplace, their livelihood, and sometimes even their playground. But now it felt like something else entirely, a place of secrets they might never fully understand. Their story became a legend, whispered about in fishing communities and beyond. It was a reminder that no matter how much we think we've mastered the natural world, there are still mysteries out there that defy explanation. And sometimes those mysteries are best left undisturbed. Details filled every waking moment of their journey, adding weight to their already exhausted bodies and minds. The strange glow wasn't just a fleeting phenomenon, it seemed to reappear at odd intervals, flickering on the horizon or shimmering beneath the waves, just out of reach. Some crew members began to document the occurrences in notebooks, trying to make sense of the patterns, if there were any. The more they observed, the more questions piled up. Could it be a natural phenomenon, an undiscovered form of marine life, or something entirely beyond their comprehension? Adding to the chaos, the environment itself seemed to shift. The usually predictable currents became erratic, almost as if they were being directed by an unseen force. Birds, which often served as indicators of nearby fish, were nowhere to be found. Even the water temperature fluctuated in ways that defied logic. The crew's seasoned instincts, honed by years on the sea, felt useless against the unpredictability surrounding them. Their high-tech cameras and equipment captured more than just the trenches and mysterious objects. One particularly chilling image showed what looked like an enormous silhouette suspended in the murky depths. It was impossible to tell if it was a creature, a structure, or something else entirely. The picture became the subject of endless debate, each theory wilder than the last. Some suggested it was a relic of an ancient sunken civilization. Others believed it was evidence of something alive, waiting and watching. Despite their fears, the crew's curiosity kept pushing them forward. They continued to lower cameras and sonar into the deep, desperate for any clue that could make sense of their findings. Every new piece of data only deepened the mystery. Frustration began to bubble over, and the tension on board was almost tangible. Longtime friendships felt strained, and the once tight-knit crew started to fracture under the weight of their shared experience. Then came the sounds. Late at night, when the sea was at its stillest, strange noises began echoing through the ship's hull. They weren't the creaks and groans of a vessel at sea, but something else entirely. Low, mournful sounds that seemed to come from the depths, growing louder and more insistent as the nights dragged on. Some crew members refused to sleep below deck, choosing instead to huddle on the surface despite the biting cold. Whatever was down there felt close, and the sense of unease became impossible to ignore. The ocean didn't just bring waves, it brought something no one expected. A haul to remember. As weeks turned into months, the mystery deepened. Scientists continued their research, publishing papers and sharing their findings with the world. Theories about the object's origin became more elaborate. Some suggested it was a fragment of a long-lost civilization, evidence of advanced technology that predates recorded history. Others speculated it was extraterrestrial, a piece of a spacecraft that had fallen to Earth and been hidden beneath the waves for centuries. Despite the excitement, there were no definitive answers. The object remained in mystery, a puzzle that refused to be solved. For the crew of the Deadliest Catch, it was a constant reminder of the ocean's secrets. They'd always known the sea was unpredictable, but this discovery had shown them just how little they truly understood. The return trips to the fishing grounds were different now. The crew worked with the same efficiency, the same determination, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation in the air. Each time they set out, they couldn't help but wonder if they'd find something else, another piece of the puzzle that was the glowing object. The ocean, as always, kept its secrets close. Fishing is a tough business, demanding physical strength, mental fortitude, and a willingness to face danger head-on. The crew knew this all too well. Their days were long, their nights often sleepless, and the cold was relentless. But they also knew the rewards. The satisfaction of a full hold, the pride of a job well done, and the knowledge that they were part of a tradition that stretched back generations.
That's pretty good. That's some big pots.
Oh my God. I'm counting it. Woo!
The glowing object had added a new layer to their lives. It was a story they'd tell for years to come, a moment that had set them apart from every other fishing crew on the Bering Sea. It was a reminder that even in a world as harsh and unforgiving as the ocean, there's still room for wonder, curiosity, and discovery. As they prepared for another season, the crew couldn't help but think about what the future might hold. The sea is vast, its depths largely unexplored. Who knows what else might be down there, waiting to be found? The glowing object was just one mystery in a world full of them, a small piece of a much larger puzzle. And for the crew of the Deadliest Catch, that was enough to keep them coming back, season after season, ready to face whatever the ocean decided to throw their way. The fishermen of the Bering Sea were no strangers to the extraordinary. Every trip out to sea came with its own dose of chaos. Crabs that wouldn't bite, waves taller than their boats, and the constant fight against the freezing wind. But this time, they brought back something that left even the hardiest of them scratching their heads. It started like any other haul. The pots were heavy, the crew was grumbling, and the crabs were plentiful. But as they emptied one particular pot, something clattered onto the deck that wasn't a crustacean. It was a chunk of metal, smooth and polished, with strange symbols etched all over its surface. Nobody knew what to make of it, but everyone knew one thing: it didn't belong there. By the time they docked back at Dutch Harbor, the story had already started spreading. The Deadliest Catch crew found something weird, people whispered at the docks. The crew was tired but restless, their minds spinning with what they'd pulled up. It wasn't treasure, not in the gold and silver sense, but it felt important. Captain Jonathan made the call to keep the object under wraps, at least for now. It was stashed away in the shipyard, covered with a tarp and guarded from curious eyes. But secrecy only added fuel to the fire. Locals, reporters, and even rival fishermen swarmed Dutch Harbor, desperate to get a glimpse. Theories ran wild. Some claimed it was part of an old shipwreck, maybe a relic from a long-lost voyage. Others said it had fallen from space, a piece of a satellite, or the more imaginative, a UFO. The symbols on the object were unlike anything anyone had seen before. They weren't letters, not in any language the experts knew. They weren't random scratches either. They looked deliberate, as if they were meant to tell a story. As the days passed, the unease among the crew grew. They couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled onto something that should have stayed hidden. The object seemed almost alive, like it was watching them, waiting. Nights at the shipyard grew eerier, the strange artifact casting long, unexplainable shadows under the dim lights. One night, as a storm battered Dutch Harbor, Captain Jonathan found himself drawn back to the shipyard. Rain pelted his jacket as he pulled the tarp off the object, running his fingers over the smooth, glowing surface. The markings seemed to shift under his touch, almost like they were trying to speak to him. He stood there for what felt like hours, the howling wind around him fading into the background. The rest of the crew wasn't faring much better. Sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, it brought strange dreams, images of endless oceans, towering waves, and those same glowing symbols. They couldn't escape it, not on land, not at sea. The object had wormed its way into their minds. Experts were called in. Scientists, historians, even a self-proclaimed paranormal investigator. Each had their own theory, but none could explain the object's origin. The symbols didn't match any known language. The metal wasn't like anything found on Earth. And then there was the weight of it, far heavier than it looked, almost as if it were holding a piece of the sea itself. Theories turned from curious to outright bizarre. Was it a message from another world? A piece of technology from an ancient, advanced civilization? Or just some odd, man-made object that ended up in the wrong place? The lack of answers only deepened the mystery. Some of the crew started to regret bringing it aboard. "Maybe we should have just left it down there," one of them muttered during a rare quiet moment at the local bar. The others nodded, sipping their drinks in uneasy silence. The ocean was vast and full of secrets. Maybe this was one they weren't meant to uncover, but curiosity had a way of digging in. Despite their reservations, the crew couldn't leave it alone. They made trips to the shipyard, running their hands over the strange object, hoping for some kind of answer. Instead, they got more questions. The object started changing, its glow growing brighter, its surface warmer to the touch. It felt alive. Then one day, a stranger arrived in Dutch Harbor. He wasn't a fisherman. His clean suit and polished shoes made that clear. He introduced himself as an investigator, someone who specialized in unusual finds. Word had spread farther than they'd thought, and now outsiders were coming to see for themselves. Captain Jonathan was reluctant but eventually agreed to show him the object. The investigator's face remained neutral as he studied it, taking notes and muttering under his breath. When he finally left, he offered no answers, only a cryptic promise to be in touch. His visit left the crew even more uneasy. What did he know that he wasn't sharing? Life seemed to return to normal, but the crew knew this was far from over. Secrets of the Bering Sea. After that, things only got stranger. People started watching the shipyard, locals, reporters, and a few faces that didn't belong to either group. The crew began to feel like they were being followed, their every move scrutinized. The object had become a magnet for attention, and not all of it was welcome. Weeks turned into months, and the crew's lives never quite returned to normal. They went back to fishing, but the object was always in the back of their minds. It was a weight, an unanswered question they couldn't shake. And deep down, they all knew one thing: whatever it wasn't finished with them. The sea had given them a mystery, and mysteries have a way of demanding answers. Whether they liked it or not, the fishermen of the Deadliest Catch were now part of a story far bigger than they'd ever imagined. Each new trip to sea felt different, weighed down by what they'd left back at Dutch Harbor. The rhythm of their work, the cranking of the winches, the sloshing of seawater on the deck felt less familiar, as if the ocean itself had shifted. They tried to focus, pulling up pots and sorting crabs, but their minds always drifted back to the object. Jonathan especially couldn't let it go. Every night he found himself returning to the shipyard, standing in the quiet darkness, staring at the strange artifact. He noticed changes, subtle shifts in the glow, new patterns emerging on its surface. It felt like the object was trying to communicate, though he couldn't begin to guess what it was saying. The crew started to notice changes in themselves too. Little things at first: a heightened awareness, sharper senses, an uncanny ability to predict the weather or the movements of the sea. Then came the dreams, vivid and unrelenting, of places they'd never seen and creatures they couldn't name. They stopped talking about it openly, afraid of what it might mean, but the tension among them was palpable. Dutch Harbor began to change as well. The town felt more crowded, more watched. Strangers appeared more frequently, some openly asking questions about the object, others lurking in the shadows. The crew's family started to notice too, asking why reporters were hanging around their homes, why men in suits were parked down the street. One evening, as Jonathan walked to the shipyard, he saw headlights in the distance. A black car idled near the fence, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. He hesitated but continued on, pulling the tarp off the object and running his hand over its surface. The glow was stronger now, pulsing faintly under his touch. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting someone to approach, but the car stayed where it was. The next day, the car was gone, but new rumors had started spreading. Some said the government was involved, that they wanted to take the object for themselves. Others claimed it was cursed, that the crew had brought something back that would doom them all. Jonathan dismissed the rumors, but the weight of them lingered. The object's changes became more pronounced. It began to emit a faint hum, barely audible but impossible to ignore. The glow grew brighter at night, casting eerie patterns on the walls of the shipyard. The crew's unease turned to fear, but they couldn't bring themselves to get rid of it. It felt like it belonged to them now, like they were meant to guard it. As the weeks stretched on, Jonathan made a decision. He called a meeting with the crew, laying everything out on the table. They needed answers, and they couldn't wait for someone else to provide them. They would take the object back out to sea, back to where they'd found it, and see if the ocean held any clues. The day they set out was clear and cold, the kind of weather that sharpened the senses. The crew worked silently, their movements purposeful. The object was secured on deck, glowing faintly under the sunlight. Jonathan stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't know what they would find, but he felt a strange sense of purpose, as if they were finally on the right path. When they reached the spot where they'd found the object, the sea was unnaturally calm. The crew lowered it over the side, watching as it disappeared into the depths. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the water began to churn, glowing faintly where the object had sunk. The crew stared, transfixed, as a column of light shot up from the ocean, illuminating the night sky. The light was blinding, and the hum they'd heard before grew louder, resonating through the boat. Jonathan felt his heart race as the symbols from the object appeared in the light, spinning and shifting, forming patterns that seemed to speak directly to him. He couldn't understand the message, but he felt it, a deep primal connection to something far greater than himself. When the light finally faded, the sea was calm again. The object was gone, and the crew stood in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process what they'd just witnessed. Jonathan turned to his crew, seeing the same awe and fear reflected in their eyes. Whatever had just happened, it had changed them. They were no longer just fishermen, they were part of something much larger. The journey back to Dutch Harbor was quiet. The crew spoke little, each lost in their thoughts. When they docked, the town was waiting, eager for answers, but the crew had none to give. The object was gone, but its impact lingered, etched into their minds and hearts. As the weeks turned to months, the crew tried to return to normal, but the experience had left its mark. They couldn't forget the light, the symbols, the feeling of connection. The ocean was no longer just a place of work. It was a place of mystery, a reminder of how much they didn't know. Jonathan found himself returning to the spot where they'd left the object, staring out at the water and wondering what it all meant. He knew they'd been part of something extraordinary, something they might never fully understand, and though the object was gone, its presence remained, a quiet reminder of the secrets the sea still held. The fishermen of the Bering Sea had always been resilient, but now they carried with them a deeper understanding of the world's mysteries. They had faced the unknown and returned, forever changed by what they had seen. And as they continued their work, pulling crabs from the depths, they couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the ocean might reveal. It started like any other day on the frigid waters of the Bering Sea. The fishermen, rugged and worn from years of battling waves and hauling nets, weren't expecting anything out of the ordinary. They were out to catch crab, not make history. But as fate would have it, the sea had a surprise waiting for them, something that would flip their world upside down. The crew was curious, but also wary. They hauled onto the deck, careful not to damage their equipment or themselves. The thing was smooth and cold to the touch, with faint grooves and symbols etched across its surface. It didn't look man-made, at least not by any man they'd ever known. They stood there staring, unsure of what to do next. Jonathan, the captain, decided they couldn't just leave it behind. He made the call to bring it back to the shipyard. It felt important, like they'd stumbled onto something that shouldn't be ignored. And big it was, maybe too big. They didn't know it yet, but their lives were about to take a turn they never signed up for. When they docked, the shipyard seemed eerily quiet, but it didn't stay that way for long. Soon, dark cars started showing up, parking across the street like vultures circling a carcass. Men in suits watched from a distance, pretending to be inconspicuous, but failing miserably. The crew noticed, and unease settled over them like a heavy fog. It felt like they were being watched, like someone was keeping tabs on them, and not in a friendly way. Jonathan's gut told him they'd messed with something they shouldn't have. He couldn't help but wonder if they should have just left the object where they found it, deep beneath the waves. But it was too late now. The thing was out of the ocean and sitting right there, drawing attention they didn't want. The crew tried to go about their business, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was like a shadow that clung to them no matter where they went. As days passed, the strange object became harder to ignore. It wasn't just a curiosity anymore, it was a problem. The crew argued about what to do. Some wanted to get rid of it, to dump it back into the sea and wash their hands of the whole mess. Others felt like they had a duty to figure out what it was, to see this through to the end. After all, they'd pulled it from the deep. Wasn't it their responsibility to uncover its secrets? The days that followed were tense. The crew stuck to themselves, keeping the object hidden and avoiding unnecessary attention. Yet the sensation of being watched never went away. It gnawed at their nerves, a persistent unease that made even the bravest among them jump at shadows. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound outside their windows felt like a threat. The next day, a team arrived. They didn't waste any time. They loaded the object onto a truck and drove off without so much as a hint of where they were taking it. The crew watched in silence as it disappeared down the road, a mix of relief and regret washing over them. They'd been part of something extraordinary, something that would stick with them forever, but now it was out of their hands. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could get after something like that. The crew went back to fishing, back to the sea they knew so well, but the memory of the object lingered. Late at night, under the stars, they'd talk about it, wondering where it came from, what it was, and what would happen to it now. They knew they'd probably never get the answers they wanted, but they also knew they'd been part of something special. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Who decides what secrets stay hidden and who gets to uncover the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.